Hi, hello, welcome to this video and welcome back to another training chit chat. Today, in honor of us having entered constant joint pain season for me, I want to talk about Starstable and accessibility. If you're new here, you probably don't know, but I have studied game dev, specifically game design, which is a very broad area, but I have a very big interest in game dev and what it goes into creating a video game and a lot of things around that too. And other than just game design, which was my discipline, the two areas that I have the biggest interest in is games and gender and accessibility in games. So I wanted to have a little talk about the accessibility in Starstable, both what we currently have. A lot of those things I also think that you might not think of as something that can be an accessibility setting for people, and also what I wish we would have, because at the end of the day, like, we don't have a lot of it in Starstable, and accessibility is very important. So that's what I'm going to talk about. So no, let's get to the training. Also, what maybe I should mention, because obviously I want to talk about accessibility in this, and I'm going to talk about loosely about the stuff we learned and discussed while I was at university for game dev, because accessibility is a very important thing. Like, making a game accessible to different people. Obviously, accessibility can be more than about making it accessible to people with different physical or cognitive needs. But I'm primarily going to talk about the accessibility that is due to these type of things, because the more your game is accessible to different people, the more players obviously you have, and a lot of time a game might lose a lot of its potential player base because it becomes unplayable for them for different reasons. And it's one of those things that obviously it's always going to be super hard to accommodate everyone, but it's always a goal I feel like you as a game dev should be working towards, making your game more accessible where you can, because it's going to open up the market to the bigger player base, and obviously that means more people buy your game and play your game, and that's good for you. But I'm not going to be here citing sources like I did back in school, because I honestly don't this is not one of my papers for university, and I did drop out because of my health. I'm still very much interested in game dev, but obviously I talked about that in an earlier training chit chat from this spring summer. So if you want to know about that a little bit more in detail, you can go watch that, because that's an hour and a half video on just that topic of me not giving up on my dream, but realizing I can't keep working on this with the way my health currently is. So if I'm gonna talk about that now, then we're not gonna get to today's topic at all. So you can go watch that video if that is interesting to you. But I'm not gonna be here oh, these are the sources and I'm more gonna talk about stuff in more the general sense. If you want to look up sources for these things, obviously I might be misremembering some stuff, so obviously this is a YouTube video, not an academic paper. This is not one of my presentations or seminars or essays I had to write when I was in school on the subject, so it's gonna be more loose. But you can obviously always go on Google Scholar and look stuff like this up yourself, because it's a very, very interesting topic, and I think it's something we need to talk about more. And on top of that, I also am a player with accessibility needs. Obviously, my needs are, for the most part, met by Starstable. That's why I can play Starstable. And I have very low accessibility needs, so I can play majority of games. I have a little bit of a problem with first-person shooters because I get nauseous. I didn't used to be that. One of the first video games I ever played was Call of Duty Black Ops on the Xbox 360. when I was way too young for that game. I was like 9, and that game has an age rating of like 18, I'm pretty sure. I was not good at it. I could barely reach around the Xbox controller, but I'm a player with accessibility needs, so this is also very, near and dear to my heart, because I sometimes need accessibility, and there are definitely people with more accessibility needs than me. So, and we're gonna get back to what I said before about the joint pain season, because that is relevant. But I'm also dyslexic, which I talk about a lot, and I think that's the first thing I want to say about Starstable. For me, as a Swedish person with dyslexia, the fact that Starstable is available to play in Swedish. Obviously, right now the game is in English because I'm gonna be poking around in like menus, I think, in this video. So I wanted to be in English so that you, the viewer, have a bigger chance of understanding what I'm talking about. But that is like one of those things, right, that you might not think of as an accessibility thing, because obviously a lot of people take their games being in their own language for granted, especially if you speak English. And then when you look at games for younger audiences like Starstable, it's also very common to see it translated into more languages. For Swedish, that isn't very often the case, and obviously this is a Swedish problem with we don't like our own language. It's a thing culturally. I know one too many people who's like, Swedish is an ugly language and it's impossible to do anything good at it, and I'm like, no. It's very much possible if you understand the language. The reason most people can't do it is because we only ever consume media in English because we have decided that our language is ugly. I'm obviously not on the team this language is, or this Swedish language is ugly. I don't think it is. I just think it is different than English. So if you decided English is the standard of all things, then yeah, it's gonna be different. But like, meh. And it's even not that different from English because we're pretty closely related. So I don't know. But that's not what we're here to discuss today. But obviously I'm currently have this game in English, and I can play games in English, but I am dyslexic. And playing a game in my own language actually makes it easier, and it makes it more casual for me. And it also made it more accessible when I was younger. Back when I started playing Starstable, I barely spoke in English. So back then I pretty much only played games that I could get in Swedish. And pretty much the only games that I can name on top of my head that have Swedish translations that isn't only targeted at children, obviously Starstable is targeted at children, but the only games that are like, and when I say children, I mean like 5-year-olds. Starstable is not targeted at 5-year-olds, but pretty much the only games I had encountered in Swedish before then were targeted at very, very young children exclusively, or were educational games. And other than Starstable, I can only name 2 other games on top of my head with Swedish translations, and that is The Sims and Minecraft. So Starstable was the only story-driven game I had that was in my own language. And also I had undiagnosed dyslexia, so I didn't have any type of help to deal with this in like my studies and stuff. So obviously when I was doing things in my free time, I didn't want to make it even harder on myself. My dyslexia is diagnosed now, before anybody asks. That's why I say I have dyslexia, because I have been told I have the diagnosis, but I got diagnosed at 19, so my entire childhood I didn't know. I just knew it was a struggle with languages, even though I really enjoyed like stories and therefore enjoyed reading, but it was still very hard. So having a game in my own language, and that's obviously that's an example of what you might not think of as an accessibility thing. And that many might just look at, it's like, oh, it's fun to be able to play a game in my own language, or maybe in your country you do translate more stuff and therefore it's kind of a given. But that's also the thing with a lot of accessibility things, that they usually benefit everyone. And even when they don't benefit you, think of like a single accessibility setting that is at the disadvantage of people who don't have a need for that accessibility setting. So obviously accessibility things are never a bad thing, and a lot of time they're good for everyone, and that goes outside of video games too, right? Like an example of an accessibility thing that benefits everyone is audiobooks. Audiobooks were originally created for people with visual impairments so that they could have better access to literature. And obviously, like, now anyone who wants can go out and listen to an audiobook. And obviously that also helps me with dyslexia, but it can also, help people who, you can like listen to an audiobook while you drive to work or while you clean or whatever. Like, you can have access to literature at times when you couldn't before, unless you had someone read to you. But obviously this is going to be about accessibility in video games. Other things about accessibility, so language is the first big thing for me. Like, I can play this game. That's one of the reasons I got really into Starstable. Not just the horses, not just the magic. When my friend showed me this game and it was in Swedish, meaning that I could play it back then. Around 13 is when I started to really learn English, but when I was introduced, because I learned English pretty late for someone from Sweden. I was around 13, 14 when I got really good at it, or like when I kind of catched up to my peers. When I started 7th grade at 13, I was kind of at the English level you'd expect of maybe someone who was like 10, 11, which is kind of when you start learning English properly. So I was definitely behind my peers. I didn't watch movies in English. I would definitely not have played a video game in English. So when my friend showed me Starstable, the fact that it was in Swedish was one of the things that, made me start watching the game and eventually started playing the game. I wouldn't be here today if it hadn't been in Swedish. And then you look at all the other languages that obviously this game is available in, and we think how many people would not have ever got in contact with this game if they hadn't been able to play it in their first language. And stuff like that. Then there's also stuff where, are more technical settings. A very common... so I'm going to begin now. I'm just going to talk about stuff that Starstable has. And common stuff that happens is about camera movement and camera shaking and stuff, because a very common problem for people, even people who don't have disabilities, an accessibility need that's often needed, is with the camera and the camera movement, because people get nauseous. And I am in this club. That's why I don't play FPS games anymore, because I tend to get very nauseous when I play first person games. Not always, but a lot of the time. And it's a miracle that I managed to play Portal 2. I'm never going to play Portal 1 because of how hard it was for me to play Portal 2, even though it's way shorter. Because I would, obviously with Portal, with the teleportation, it's also get worse, but I got so nauseous from playing that game that I had to take breaks, so I was just laying on the floor staring up into the ceiling because I was nauseous on that level. But in Starstable, I guess, I don't know how long you guys have been playing this game, but I'm trying to remember what year it was. Maybe it was 2017, perhaps? They did a lot of visual stuff, changes in the game in 2017. But if you're here in game, you might see here that there's something called jump camera horse. I have this unchecked. This came in 2017, I think, where they changed the game camera. It became closer up to the character than it had been before. Now obviously we can change that with the distance sliders. We couldn't do that back then. And we also got a jump camera. And this was originally, you couldn't uncheck this. This was not an optional thing. And what happened was that a lot of players, me included, got very nauseous of this. I think it took a week for them to add that ability to uncheck this thing. But during that week is I barely played, and obviously I was mostly training horses, and I could not really trying to do races where I need to jump. I basically had to look away from the screen when I jumped, because I, after just a few jumps, would get very nauseous from how the camera moved. And obviously, you've seen the races in game. How many races are there where you don't have to jump the slightest? There's the pole bending. Obviously we didn't have Starship Ranch yet, that came in 2020, but we used to have a pole bending race in Moreland. You don't, so that pole bending. And then Tan's race in Moreland. And you used to you didn't have to, but So I could also do Loretta's original race, which was longer back then. It's more the way that the traditional one goes now. You could do that. And then it's like the Forpinta race. And the barrel race at Marley's. I think there might be more, but like those are basically the only races I could do then. Because I got nauseous, and otherwise I would have to like look away from the screen. So it's very hard for me to play that game, and I think it took them about a week. So the next Wednesday they gave us the feature to be able to uncheck the jump camera, and obviously I've had it unchecked ever since because I get nauseous, and it's very common for people to get nausea from games, especially 3D games. I had one of my teachers at university who was professor, doctor, whatever. He's studied a lot of video games, and he's very well respected in the Swedish game dev world for his knowledge, and he's very well known and he's super cool. He can't play any 3D games, he said, because he gets, like, if it is in 3D, he gets nauseous pretty much immediately. So it's a very common thing for people, especially in 3D games, to get nauseous with camera movements. So having settings to adjust the camera can be mean. So once again, like, also accessibility is not always about disabilities. And especially also when you get older, it's more common for people to get more and more nauseous in 3D games the older you get. We've seen that. I don't think there's any research on this, but it's a common trend that you see people when they get into maybe their when they get a little bit older, maybe they get into their 30s or their 40s, people who, you know, they're young enough, they grew up playing video games, but they are struggling playing a lot of video games now because suddenly they get easily nauseous from the movement in a 3D environment, and therefore having settings to combat that is a way to, you know, not just allow new players to play your game, but also to keep existing players, or keep players from within the genre, even if your game is new, because a sensitivity to movement in 3D is very common to develop as you get older. In what we've been able to see. Once again, I don't know any research on this, but it's a very common thing that people talk about, like that they see this as kind of a trend. When you get older, a lot of people, and obviously it's not super old, the 30-year-old is not very old. So that's very important. And obviously now we can adjust like how far away or how close up we are to both the character and the horse in the camera settings. We could do that originally. But yeah, that's also an accessibility feature that I use, even though that has nothing to do with obviously my disability, which is dyslexia, or anything else. We're gonna get to my joint pain stuff and how Starstable has features that help me with that. But another one also that you can uncheck, that is something that helps me, that you might be able to see I have unchecked, is that I don't have the rotating minimap. That was also a thing that was introduced, and I don't remember if we could uncheck it immediately or not. I don't think we could. And it was one of those things that it was both, it didn't help me with anything, and it also, the constant spinning also caused dizziness for me. I didn't get nauseous the way I got from the jump camera, where I got motion sickness, maybe I should say. But I did feel a little bit dizzy from it. So being able to uncheck that is also something that made the game, and that was an easier thing obviously than jumping, because back then the map was in the bottom right corner and I was playing a laptop, so I would just like put a post-it note pad, a post-it note like on the bottom of the screen, or like lean it on something like a small thing. I would lean it against on the laptop against the screen so it blocked that area. So I had a fix for it before Starstable released one. Because I'm pretty sure we couldn't uncheck it originally, but now, you know, I don't have that on. And obviously that's something that may or may not affect people. But having the ability to turn something off that makes the game, less accessible. And yeah, like, obviously all these are accessibility settings. And these are the stuff that I use. Something that I use that I don't think a lot of people might also think of as accessibility, and I don't use this for accessibility more because it's nice in videos and photos, but we can change the time in game now, which we didn't be able to use to. And that is something that can be an accessibility feature for some people. If you have maybe, eye condition and stuff, looking at things in the dark can be very straining on the eyes and make it harder to play, and especially, if you can only play, let's say, after work, it might get dark in game pretty quickly. Being able to adjust the time to bright when it's brighter so that you don't have to strain your eyes can make the game more accessible. And back when we didn't have that feature, it would be harder for these people to play more because they wouldn't be able to play properly the times when they had the time after work or after school, let's say. So yeah, and obviously I feel like that's also a great example of a feature that you obviously I don't even think this was meant to be an accessibility feature, but it can be that for someone. And that's the thing, it's like it wasn't meant to be an accessibility feature, but it might be one now, and it is probably also benefiting you and me. I don't need this to be able to play the game, but it's helping me if I have a little bit of time left over in the middle of the night and I want to take photos. Is there a Moreland Championship? Oh, I think it's... Yeah, no, I'm too late. But... Yeah, so... We can use it for other stuff. And... I think that's what we need to think about. Like, accessibility is about giving more people access to a game, and sometimes these stuff are not going to benefit you in any way, but it isn't a bad thing because it gives more people access to the game and it makes the game better. And it also means that maybe if something happens, that's the thing also about, as we talked about, a lot of people develop motion sickness from 3D video games as they get older. That could be you, but it could also be that, a friendly reminder that you can become disabled at any point of your life. It's the only minority that you can become a part of overnight, basically. In an instant. If something happens, if you're in an accident, if you get sick with something that then, affects how you're able to live your life, anyone can become disabled. And if that were to happen to me, or that were to happen to you, if a game you love don't have accessibility features that would help you with that, then you would no longer be able to play that game. And then you would suddenly lose access to something you love. And obviously that is not fun. So it's never something bad to add. But I've heard so many other people I met, it's like, yeah, but you can't, and like, that's the thing, you can't do everything, but you should always strive to do better. And that's the thing, like, okay, yeah, you can't do everything, and you shouldn't beat yourself up over, especially if you're a smaller team. Obviously, Starstable is a pretty big team, especially for a Swedish company. Most Swedish game dev studios are like 30 people or less. Of course, there are bigger ones than that, but majorities are on the 30 people mark. So Starstable being, I don't know exactly how many devs there are, but the last time I heard anything, which was a few years ago, they were around like 200. Maybe they're a little bit less now, maybe they're a little bit more, I don't know, but 200 is a lot over the average in this country. They're a pretty big studio. And I think that's worth pointing out. So, accessibility features are always great. Now we're gonna get to the stuff I'm using. Obviously, I use this. I usually play this game in Swedish. It's often in Swedish in my videos too. But the biggest thing I use, and I'm actually currently using right now, actually playing because I developed the need right now, I felt the need right now, is that we have multiple ways to steer in this game that are all of them always active. And because I mentioned in the intro of this video, I have joint and muscle pain, actually. I don't know why. So I can't tell you why I have these problems. I have had them for over a decade. I think they started when I was around 9, 10, I think, and I'm 23 now, so you can do the math, it's over 10 years. it's, I mean, what, 13, 14 years, right? Probably, yeah, that sounds about right. And obviously, I've had this problem since before I played Starstable, but they have, some of them have gotten worse with time. And they also get worse with the season. And especially this change of seasons, so like right now we're in the change from like fall to winter, which is one of the worst times. I can get a lot of pains in my joints and muscles, and that can get especially bad in my hands and wrists, because of just the sheer amount of joints in your hand. If you look at your hand, there's a lot of joints in your hand, okay? And if you have pain in every one of those, and it's like it's not even a high level pain, it's just that it's a constant, like, medium level pain, and that is honestly, as someone who's had muscle pain with stabbing pains in short intervals in the past as well, the like constant medium level pain is worse because it just drains you over time, always being in pain. Obviously, some days are worse, some days I don't have it at all. There can be weeks or even months when I don't have any pain, and there are years when the pain is just not as bad as other years, even when I have it. So it comes and goes. But when I have pain, and obviously, as I just mentioned, like I'm in a period when I have a lot of pain currently, and it's because of the change of season when it's getting colder. And my joints don't like that. When I get a lot of pain in my hands, sitting and do the same motion, even a small thing as, just pressing on keys, can in the long run get very painful. So while I can, still play the game using the WASD, like the normal WASD, and then spacebar to jump, having the ability to, like, in the middle of a race, go from, okay, I'm now playing with WASD and space, but I can also, in the middle of a race now, you can't even tell because you're just watching the screen recording, but I'm now playing with the arrow keys and the 0 on my numpad. And I can play it just as well as I can normally. Obviously, I've learned to play with both right and left hand. I was not as good as playing with my right hand when I started playing this game. I was more used to playing WASD because that's common in other games. I was playing, Minecraft before this. But if I get a lot of pain suddenly, or it eventually gets too high in my left hand, I can just switch to playing with my right hand. And that's a really big thing for me. But even there, I will eventually have the same problem where it is hard. Where just pressing keys repeatedly over and over again, and also holding up the weight of my own hand, which might sound like a weird thing, but that is actually one of the things that cause the most pain. When you sit at a keyboard, you obviously don't have your hands flat towards the keys. You hold your fingers up, kind of like almost like you hook your fingers, right, to press on the keys. Look at yourself when you play. That is how you hold your hands, and that means I have to activate, the muscles in the hand to keep it like that, and that can get painful eventually. So, something I also do, which I'm not as good at because I haven't done it for as long, but I also do, is, as you can tell now, I play with my mouse sometimes. And then I still have to use the spacebar to jump, but I can just keep my hand a lot more flat, resting against the table. And I don't have to hold up the weight of my hand the same way when I can rest it against the mouse. So these 3 ways of steering in the game, and obviously I can, even sometimes when I still steer with, I will still, turn with A and D, I might still use the scroll wheel on my mouse to accelerate and, decrease my speed, because that is, it takes less effort and is less painful. And that is also probably not meant as an accessibility feature, right? It is probably just that when they made this game, they looked at, okay, younger children are probably going to be playing this game, and while seasoned gamers, like probably the people who made the game, want to play with WASD. Little children usually want to play with the arrow keys. So let's give them that. And this could also, you know, be accessibility for a person, you know, who is... I think a lot of gamers who are left-handed probably still play with WASD and then the mouse the same way I, as a right-handed person, do. But if you don't want to, you can just, you know, if you have a mouse that isn't molded to be used for a right hand, like mine is, if you have a more generic shaped mouse, you can still use that with, you know, your left hand, and you can play with your right hand on the arrow keys and the 0 numpad. You obviously need to have a numpad for this. But also the same way goes, because sometimes it is my right hand that is the most painful. And then I don't want to use my right hand a lot. So when I'm just like running around in like Hollow Woods, if my right hand is in pain and I don't want to use my mouse, I can... actually, where should we go? Let's call home and go the other way. I can play with just WASD, spacebar, and E, obviously for interaction. After that, originally I didn't use it very much, but after I learned it, I ended up, when I had pain, being able to just have a hand that doesn't do anything. You know, if I was running around collecting lights in Hollow Woods, obviously I only need to steer, but you know, I want to pick up plants and stuff, or I want to pick up recyclables while running around, I can do that. I can have breaks for my one of my hands, and that actually ended up being an accessibility for me too, even though that was probably just added as a feature that a dev was probably missing from something they saw in another game. But that ended up also, you know, when I have joint pain, and the fact that I have all these options to steering that are all always active, like I can, you know, change right now in the middle of a race. I don't have to go into the settings. That makes Starstable a game that's more accessible to me when I am in these periods of joint pain than many other games, even though Starstable are missing some key accessibility features that other games have that, once again, you probably don't even think of as an accessibility feature. And that is what this next part of the video is going to be about. I'm going to talk about what I want to see in Starstable, because while we have a lot of accessibility features, and I have pretty much everything I personally need, I, as I've already stated, have very small accessibility needs. And a lot of it is already featured. Like, Starstable has a font that is relatively easy for me, despite dyslexia, to read. And that is probably not even intentional. They probably wanted something that was cute, and I have had some problems. Like, my dyslexia I will still read words wrong occasionally, but it is still a relatively dyslexic friendly font in my experience. But I also need to point out that I have I'm on the lower end of the dyslexia spectrum of like how much problems I get from it. So if someone has more dyslexia, if someone is like on the higher end of the spectrum of how much they struggle due to their dyslexia, then that might not be the case. I have low accessibility needs, and my needs are met for the most part. But that don't go for everyone. And there are a lot of stuff that I've said, like, that you usually see in video games that Starstable doesn't have. And the first one, I think it's a little bit funny to see a Starstable doesn't have, because, like, while I still think we should have it, I kind of think it's like speaks of like who they were really targeting the game for, because the most common accessibility settings in games overall, this is something we talked about in school, and this is also one of the areas where my two, interests in games in gender and accessibility in games overlap, is colorblind filters. Colorblind filters is the most common accessibility setting found in video games. because being colorblind is very common in men, and it's very common then since we still have most game devs are male. Definitely not all of them. Obviously, I am here. While I'm currently not working with video games, I have made video games, and as I've mentioned in the past, I have made a video game that was nominated for an award once. So I would like to say that I am a game dev, and obviously I'm neither colorblind nor male. But since a lot of people who develop games are colorblind, and a lot of their players are colorblind, even though it's not the majority, but since colorblindness is something that is predominantly found in male people, or people assigned male at birth, I should say, that is one of the most common accessibility features found in video games. And since Starstable isn't targeted at, or since Starstable is predominantly targeted at young women, or young girls, it's kind of funny. But at the same time, people assigned female at birth can also be colorblind. And especially since, you know, Starstable, especially in the later years, in like the language used in, for example, quests, has steered more towards being more gender neutral and not very woman-centric. If you go back and like read old quests that haven't been updated, it's very often weird to refer to as like little girl or young lady or something like that. And the game has moved away from that. If usually NPCs will either refer to us by our names, or if they don't know our names, they usually don't say anything that genders us. So even if the character is made to look feminine, the language used to describe us in newer quests is predominantly not using any way to gender us in that way. Not like when the game was first created. So I think it is also safe to say that like the game is trying to not be as exclusively, oh, you're a girl, which obviously is more. Now accessibility is not the word I'm looking for, but that is, you know, more inclusive is the word I'm looking for other people, both people who are men, but also people who are, you know, non-binary or no, trans in other senses. And that's the thing too. So women and, you know, people who are assigned female at birth can also be colorblind, but also not everyone who is assigned male at birth is a man, and there are definitely people who were assigned male at birth and are colorblind no matter what gender they were assigned at birth who play this game. And I think it's interesting that we don't have a colorblind filter or colorblind settings, since that is the most common accessibility feature found in games. Obviously due to men being the mostly men or people assigned male at birth being who is seen as the target demographic or the kind of given player of video games, or, you know, the given customer of video games is considered usually to be men or male people. But that doesn't mean that obviously people who aren't men can't be colorblind, whether that is, you know, someone assigned female at birth being colorblind, or, you know, a colorblind person assigned male at birth who is not a man. But colorblind filters, okay? Like, obviously filters aren't the best solutions. They're better to have like built-in settings, but we talked about this in my last video when I also talked about game dev stuff with the buying the Black Forest horse, that adding in features, especially big ones later on that weren't originally planned for when you made a game, is like 2, 3, 4 times harder than like just making them when the game is originally made. To implement stuff later is always a lot harder if you haven't laid the base work for it potentially being a thing in the future. And that is a thing I feel like they've talked about with Starstable is, the small team originally. There were a lot of things where, and that's a mistake all game dev makes. We're all like, oh yeah, we're gonna plan ahead for all these different features, and there's always things you can't predict that you're gonna need or you're gonna want, or even gonna be able to possible for you to make one day, because maybe one day you're gonna be a bigger team or whatever. So it's a mistake we all make, but I don't think more advanced colorblind settings would right now be a possibility for Starstable, but I definitely feel like colorblind filters could be a thing. And that's the thing with all these things I'm gonna say. These are, I'm gonna say smaller things too, but the bigger things, they're the dream, and I think we should have them at some point. But I also know that developing them, especially for a game that already exists, where this wasn't originally planned for, therefore the structure to implement it is entirely missing and needs to be done from scratch, and also implemented in code that already exists, which is always a more complicated, buggy, and time-consuming process. I think it's something we need one day, and I'm also gonna see stuff I feel like I would personally like to see in the meantime to bridge the gaps that are smaller things that hopefully are easier to implement. Because it isn't we can't have anything until we have it perfect. It's more of like we need to add more stuff. We need to see it, and the big things, I want them in the future. I understand we can't have them now because they are big projects. They would take time to do and implement and create and make sure that they work. But we can have other small things in the meantime to bridge the gaps. And it's not going to be perfect, but it's going to be something. And I want to see that because I think it's important. And also I love this game. I want this game to be available to more people. More people have access to it, not just, based on what computer they have or internet connection, which is sometimes a problem for me. I have poor internet. But also, just what you're able to do. So yeah, colorblind is one of those things. It would not benefit me in any way. I am not colorblind. But it could definitely make the game more accessible to other people and also be helpful to a lot of people. And it's one of those things like it's kind of expected in a video game. It's kind of weird we don't have it. Another thing that's kind of expected of video games is weird that we don't have, which is probably because, as I said, smaller game and they give us other options to do this, but not the full one, is key mapping, which, if you aren't familiar with the term, is that you can go into settings and decide what button to press to do what thing. So, like for example, I currently control with WASD, or I can control with the arrows. I could, if I want to, go into the settings and say, actually I want to steer with, I don't know, ESDF. I was looking at my keyboard, not on the screen, so I crashed. For example, I would be able to go into settings and do that. Let's say that I want to open my bag with, that's currently I or B. I could set another key to that, or whatever. You can decide which key on your keyboard does what thing in game. That is something that's kind of expected of games. Starstable doesn't have any settings of these. Instead, we have, to control, we have 3 different options. I think we need this eventually. It's one of those things that, like, yes, this is gonna take a really long time to develop. It's gonna take a lot of resources. It's not gonna be here tomorrow. It's not gonna be here within the next year if we ever get it. It's gonna take time to develop. Because they're gonna have to, from my personal experience, it's gonna be something that you have to go down to like the very beginning and change, and it's gonna probably mess with pretty much everything that's ever been added to the game. It's gonna be a very buggy process, but I feel like we need it, and that's gonna be more accessible, and it's also gonna open up to making people be able to set the game to be what they need more accessibly. And obviously we have other hotkeys as well. What I would like to see as a smaller fix in the meantime that at least would help me is, obviously I've already talked about how I play a little bit with a mix of the 3 different ways we can steer, but I still don't have full ability to play the game fully as intended when I don't use the WASD steering controls. Because I don't have access to the other hotkeys, for example. So it kind of feels like when developing the games in the last few years, I feel like you kind of sometimes they forget they have more than one way that you can play this game. And they focus on the normal gamer way, which is gonna be the way that most people play this. But that is not, this video is about accessibility, and the way that most people play isn't always what's accessible. So I feel like it is fair to say that the other ways should have access to certain hotkeys as well. For me personally, I don't feel the need to have all the hotkeys I have accessible when playing with WASD, but that could be the case for some person. But personally, what I miss the most when I play with the arrow keys is not having a way to interact, because I can't use my mouse with my left hand. I'm not capable of doing that, and usually when I play with my right hand it's because my left hand is in a lot of pain, and I've just had to switch to play with my right hand because my left hand told me to stop, it hurts. So, and obviously there's also now a hotkey here, like C, to get my shared moments. And I that happens like once every 30 minutes. It could be nice. Also, like the same way, tab is a hotkey for leveling up, and then you press enter, and then I can also press 1 to call for pickup, or on the normal like number bar, or 2 for trailblaze. That is not. I don't feel like I need all those hotkeys. What I miss when I play with the arrow keys, obviously, I have a full-sized keyboard with a numpad, for precisely the reason that I sometimes play this game using arrow keys and 0. But what I miss is being able to pick stuff up, because now if I want to pick something up while racing, I need to let go of my steering and use the mouse, and I usually end up having to stop, like I did now when I wanted to, take the shared moment. I had to stop and use the mouse to do that. So obviously there isn't currently a way to like continue dialogue that you already started unless you use the mouse. And I know they added the e-interact feature because a lot of players back then, most were playing on laptop, and a lot of them like didn't have mice. Even when I play on laptop, and even back when I only had laptops, I've always had an extra mouse. They're not that expensive. Like, you can get a very cheap mouse. The ones I really played with was super cheap. So like you can get one connected to your laptop. I recommend it. It makes the experience a whole lot better. But like right now I can only like interact by using the mouse. So I would like, since we already have 0 on the numpad does something, but the 0 on the top of the keyboard doesn't do anything. We obviously know that it isn't a number, but the placement of the key that they can like tell what it does. And I would like 1 on my numpad to be an option instead of E when interacting, or both of them being active. The same way I can use both the arrow keys and WASD for the same things. They're both always active. And I would like to remain that way. Even if I'm able to key map myself, I would always love to be able to show that I have 2 ways of steering active. That's one of the reasons that makes Starstable more accessible than other games for me. I can, in the middle of gaming, without having to open a menu, at less than a moment's notice, just change the way I'm steering based on my current needs. Instead of having to go into the settings. Because obviously the settings are more accessible, but they take time, and when playing a live game, I don't always have that time. So being able to change that in the settings would be very great, but I would also still personally really enjoy having these multiple ways of steering, of playing, possible as well. But yeah, I would like a 1 to interact, so I have more access to playing the full game when playing with arrow keys, because it is an accessibility thing for me. And one of the reasons I can play Starstable even when I otherwise wouldn't be able to play. Both I can continue to play for longer, and also when I can't really play other games, because I would have to go into settings like every 5 minutes if I like to change how I was playing. Other than that, obviously I'm gonna try and play this race with the mouse. I'm still not super great at playing with the mouse, but I'm getting better. I would like to have a way. Obviously, I have solved it by using the space bar to jump still. But one, you can't use the steering wheel when you're on foot with the character, and you also obviously don't have a jump. And I would love to see to be able to play this with just the mouse, because what I can do, especially when I'm running like in Hollow Woods when I don't have to jump or stuff like that, is that I can, when I have a lot of pain, I can put the mouse in my lap and play with it. I don't have to keep my arms up on the desk to play, and that is also something that can help with the pain, to have them at, like, have the hands lower down. Because when this happens in other games, when I play other games, if a game has controller support, I can also sometimes play it better than just keyboard. And that gets me to my other point. Other than control mapping, I also would love to see Starstable adding controller support. And once again, it might not be as detailed as what we currently have, and it would take a long time to do, but I would love to one day see controller support for this game. Both for myself as accessibility thing, but if you have control mapping and you have controller support, a lot of consoles, like PlayStation or Xbox, they have accessibility controllers that are for people with physical disabilities, where they are made so that they can play video games on console, but for some reason, whatever it is for them personally, they can't use the normal controllers. So there are controllers where they have access to all the buttons, it's just in a different mapping, and they look different depending on their needs, and then now they can play games. And if we have controller support and they just support the normal inputs of a controller, then they would be able to adapt, like obviously the PC or the console, obviously it started with some PC, but the PC is gonna detect it as a normal PlayStation or Xbox controller. So if we have mapped that a certain button does a certain thing, even if the controller has a different shape, but it is, let's say, a PlayStation accessibility controller, then a person who can only play games through this accessibility controller would still be able to play the game, because it has the same buttons, just in a different shape, a different layout that is for their personal needs. It would make the game a lot more accessible. And also for me personally, because while Starstable is one of the games I play with keyboard that is more accessible than other games I play with keyboard, because of the different options in steering, I can also often still play games I play with controllers, because I can take my controller and I can put it in my lap and I don't have to hold it up. And the same thing there, I don't have to hold up the weight of my own hand when I'm in the most pain. And in Starstable, the way I currently solve that is by sometimes taking my mouse. I don't want to pull it right now. The cable is stuck, but I will get the cable unstuck and I would put it in my lap. And I can play with that, and I don't have to hold up my hand, but I still have to have one hand on the keyboard and one hand holding up to press the spacebar. And I would love to see a way where I could steer with just my mouse. I can obviously already collect stuff. I might have to slow down, but I can just, let's see if I can get this. Yes, recyclable. We could. Obviously, I can just, collect with the mouse, and I can steer, and I can obviously speed up, and I can slow down using the scroll wheel. I would love to see, because there is one button on the mouse that we currently aren't using in Starstable. All mice have at least 3 buttons. They have the left click button, which I can use to steer. They have the right click button, which I can use to control the camera. And then they have a button under the scroll wheel that you can press, and this does nothing. So my mouse has more buttons than that, but those are not standard. But all mice have those 3 buttons. They have a left click, a right click, and one underneath the scroll wheel. And I would like to see, even though it would be harder to press than other buttons, I would love for pressing down the scroll wheel to be a jump. Because that would make the game more accessible, and that for me would work until we got controller support. Because controller support is something I would love to. It would also make it great when I'm feeling down. I also have a laptop, I can play from bed already, but my desktop is a lot better, and I can just play from bed, look at my desktop, and like play with my wireless controller. But it's also going to be so much more accessible for people with bigger physical accessibility needs, since a lot of those who are already interested in gaming are going to have a specific accessibility controller made for them. And the computer or the console, but the computer for us in this case, is already going to detect that as a normal controller. So if the normal controllers are already supported, it's not going to make a difference. It's going to be like the same, and that's going to open up accessibility to so many more people and give so many more people access to this game. Those are kind of the stuff I had put on my list, the little like points I would make. Let's find a nice place to finish off the video. So there are definitely a lot more accessibility features that could be done. I know people have used, for example, third-party like screen readers to help them read if they have, bigger accessibility needs than me. I have never used that. But having, the ability to get quests read aloud for you could definitely be an accessibility feature. Yeah, I hope you enjoyed this video. This is something that is, very near and dear to me, both having studied game dev, being interested in game dev, but also being a person that has slight accessibility needs. But I would love to hear your opinions on this. Are these features you would like to see? Are any of these features either, the ones we already have, are you benefiting from them? Are these things that you use? Have you ever thought about that these could make the game more accessible for another player? Or were they just, neat features or features you didn't even think about? But also the features I talked about, would you like to see them? I know other people who would also be very interested in seeing like controller support for this game, to be able to play like with an Xbox controller or a PlayStation controller or whatever. Or are there any accessibility needs you would like to see, or that you feel like you need, that would make this game better to play for you, that maybe sometimes you can't play it because of different reasons, and what would you like to see? Because that is something this game is lacking. I love this game, but we have so little accessibility. It is not even the bare minimum. And no matter how much I love this game, it's never going to change the fact that it is inaccessible in that way. And that if I had written a report in school about the accessibility in this game, I would have to have this to rule that no, this is not an accessible game. No matter how much I love it. My love for this game cannot change the fact that it's inaccessible in many ways. And that's why I want it to get more accessible, because I love this game. And I want it to be the very best it can be. So yeah, I would love to hear your thoughts about the accessibility we already have, about the accessibility we need. What would you like to see? Maybe you know someone who would love to play this game but can't for some reason. It's a very interesting and very deep topic for me, and obviously a very near and dear topic that I would love to discuss with people. So, please leave a comment about any of these things down below. I am very excited to talk to you about it. If you don't want to talk to me about it here on YouTube, publicly in the comments, you can also, send me a little DM on Instagram if you want to talk about accessibility in games, because I think it's very interesting. Or you could just follow me on Instagram. I'm Kajsa Dragonroad there too, and it is linked down below in the description box. If you want to follow me, I post Starstable photos, and I also post some stuff in my stories. Sometimes I post pictures of my real life pets, or what I'm reading, or about my day, or whatever. You get a little bit of mix of everything on the stories. So if that sounds interesting, you can also follow me on there. But you're also free to DM me if you want to talk about accessibility in games specifically, or if you have questions. I am not the most social person in the world. I'm sometimes scared when people talk to me. I don't know how to interact, but I do my best. Just keep that in mind. But yeah, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. It was very fun to make. This is something I'm obviously very passionate about. So, if you enjoyed it, I would love if you left a like to, show me that you did, and, to tell YouTube that this is good stuff. And if you haven't already, please consider subscribing. I appreciate everyone who's already done so. I love you all very much. And, if you want to see me play more Starstable, and hopefully in the future keep talking a bit about these game dev stuff as I get back into the thought process, because I would love to do that. So, if you want to stick around for that, please consider subscribing. Yeah, I want to thank you again so much for watching this video, and I guess I'll talk to you soon. Bye bye!